Oh, wow, look out, there's such a neat crowd here. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. I see a lot of first-time faces, and I see a lot of regulars and a lot of in-between. So I would like to add John's welcome to you all. I know you're here because of our speaker today, Kevin Snider. So before I bring him up, let me just tell you a little about him. Be prepared to be impressed, all right? Because we're in for a treat. Kevin was here with us a couple of years ago. Does anybody remember? Were you here and remember him? I know that's why you're back. Okay, let me see. Kevin Snider, Chief Justice for Pacific Justice Institute. Chief Justice, all right? I'm sure he'll tell you about his organization, but I'll start off by telling you they have over 1,000 lawyers who volunteer their time to litigate cases that have to do with our faith, and they do it pro bono, no charge. Mr. Snider has been attorney since 1994, primarily in the area of constitutional law and civil rights. He served as chief counsel for the Pacific Justice Institute for 19 years. Is that right, Kevin? 19? Yes. All right. Giving counsel to pastors and religious leaders day in and day out on a variety of topics. He has taught church law and served on many prestigious commissions and boards. Okay, get ready for this one. Mr. Snider has litigated a number of legal cases which have garnered national attention, including 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases. He litigated the recent Gateway City Church, and Gavin Newsom argued in defense of the national motto, "In God We Trust," and before the Ninth Court of Appeals, and he represented Rick Warren in preserving the invocation and benediction at the inauguration of Barack Obama. Wow. And he's here with us today. Can you believe it? So, Kevin, I want to tell you, this is a bigger crowd than usual. And so they've all come to hear you. And we can't wait. So come on up and share and educate us. Let's make Kevin feel welcome.
Thank you for coming out to this afternoon. I know it's a hot August day in the Sacramento, greater Sacramento area. I'm entitled my presentation today, Making the Most of Your Most Productive Years. Now, it wasn't a couple of years ago I turned 60, and when you turn 60, you become a bit reflective. Whenever you have a birthday that has a 0 behind it, and the IRS gave me a new title of senior citizen. And so, better or worse, that's where I am and where I've arrived. I thought that I would be winding down when I would be approaching these years. When I first became Chief Counsel of the Pacific Justice Institute in 2004, there was just me and another attorney. Our president is an attorney, but he does the fundraising and things that presidents have to do. That being said, a few years ago, we had 5 attorneys, and we had 3 attorneys, and we had 14 cases in our caseload. And we had some good ones, but still it was fairly modest. Well, now I have 34 attorneys in 23 states with 212 cases in adversarial proceedings. So things have really picked up in my 60s. And Winston Churchill became prime minister when he was 65. And he says, why couldn't this have happened to me when I was in my 30s, when I had all this energy and what have you? But as it happens, oftentimes the greatest burdens fall on us in our latter years. And so when I was turning 60 that year, actually the year 59 was harder than actually turning 60, because you're waiting for this climax or catastrophe on your birthday. And so my wife sent me a study, or told me about a study from the New England Journal of Medicine. And they did a survey and to find out what decade of life is the most productive, particularly for high achievers. And so what do you think it is? Is it 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? What is the most productive decade? 70s? 60s, 50s, 40s? Okay, you're all pretty close, spot on. It's 60s are the most productive decade for high achievers. 70s are the second most productive, and 50s the third. And they gave some examples. The average age of presidents taking office is 55, and they leave at 60. The average age appointment to the Supreme Court is 53, and retirement is 78. The average age of current governors is 65 for Republicans and 66 for Democrats. Average age of senators is 64, members of the House 58. The average age of presidents of the most prominent corporations is 63. The average age of pastors for the 100 largest churches in the country is 71. The average age of popes elected to the Vatican is 76. Average age of Nobel Prize winners is 59. So I'm in a good group of productive people, and I'm glad to be here, honored to be here. You know, Moses was 80 when he was called back to Egypt, and that would be, people lived longer then, so that'd be about 60 in our age groups. And when he was called, God said to him, "What do you have in your hand?" He says, "You mean my stick?" And so this staff, if you read Exodus, it's really autobiographical. It's believed he wrote that. And his staff keeps making a reappearance throughout the narrative. Have you ever noticed that? The stick keeps coming back. It's an odd item. I'm sure English majors would be able to tell us what that symbolizes, but I'm not going to, that's above my pay grade. Anyway, I'd like to tell you about, start with a lady that we were representing. Her name is Artis, and she is 86 years old. Still is physically active and very sharp. She and her husband moved into the Yountville Veterans Home. Anyone familiar with it? Her husband was a World War II veteran. He later passed while there. And she says that God put me in the business of helping people find him. So she volunteered to assist the chaplains in Bible studies and that sort of thing. Well, she started to encounter opposition at the Veterans Home when some officials claimed that one of her discussions between her and a resident about heaven and hell had allegedly caused him to lose sleep, and they made a report against her for elder abuse and emotional abuse and otherwise illegal activities. Well, her status as a volunteer was suspended indefinitely, and she found herself under investigation by the good folks running our state. And Artis's view of the world is that she has a right to her opinion, and she has a right to share it with willing listeners, and she had no intention of letting the bureaucratic machine grind her up. So what does she do? She called a lawyer instead of just going back to her room or leaving. And Artis wasn't one to stay out of trouble. She's a Jew who believes that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And so when she set up the annual Hanukkah display, she included with the menorah and these other items a verse of scripture about Yeshua going to the temple during Hanukkah. Well, this enraged the rabbi, and so Calvet decided to evict her from the Veterans Home. And so I assigned this file to one of our fine attorneys, Matt McReynolds. Where's Belle? I saw Belle there. Belle used to volunteer for us in our office for years, but she knows who Matt is. And so I won't bore you with the details, but needless to say, Artis is still there, and she is still actively ministering in that Veterans Home. So you ask, can anything stop the work of the kingdom of God? We don't need the Constitution, because artists had the conviction that there's a direct connection between our constitutional freedoms and in our ability to enjoy Christian ministry. They're not separated. Now, you may say, well, aren't we just supposed to kind of turn a blind eye and go along with everything? And for example, wasn't the early church under the authoritarian rule of the Roman Empire? And doesn't the church flourish in China? And my answer is certainly. But God hasn't placed you in a different time in history or a different place. You are here, and this is now. And in his grace and plan, you are in a constitutional republic where liberties of speech, assembly, due process are the tools, like the staff of Moses, that God has put in your hands, and it's time that we use it. Well, when these constitutional rights are violated by government agencies, it has a direct negative impact on ministries and the proclamation of the gospel. Let me give you some examples. Gavin Newsom gave an order to lock down churches. We all went through that and know about that. And he and public health officials suspended parts of the Constitution. And that include locking down churches, and in some instances preventing home Bible studies. Santa Clara County was the worst place in the nation. It was actually worse than New York City in the lockdowns. In fact, they were fining churches $5,000 a day for staying open, not just on Sundays, but every day. And those fines kept going up and up, just like, remember the old gas pumps? They used to have a bell that would ring every gallon. So that was $5,000 every day. The bell would ring, and so it would get up to 6 figures, and in one case got up to 7 figures of fines. Well, and when I say that parts of the Constitution were suspended, that's not hyperbole. It's not a conspiracy theory hatched on the internet. Let me quote you from the deputy district attorney from the county of Santa Clara. She told the New York Times, quotes, "I don't feel comfortable being in that position of saying, you know, your constitutional rights don't really matter right now, but I've had to. Right now we're putting parts of the Constitution on hold. We really are. Freedom of assembly, right to practice religion," end quotes. So that's not my conspiracy theory. This is their language. Well, five churches. I have so many cases I can't remember them all. That is one of the downsides of reaching the 60th birthday. But anyway, we had 5 churches in the San Jose area who wanted to open up, and so I took on their case, and by the grace of God, we were eventually able to get a 6-3 decision from the Supreme Court to reverse that and open up churches. I got that opinion, actually, the order from the court emailed to me at 6:30 at night on a Friday night, which probably made them angry because it was 9:30 in Washington, D.C. So I emailed the churches and said you could open up on Sunday. So God is good, and we're able to do that. But unfortunately, the COVID restrictions are not the only incursions by the government to limit people and businesses and ministries from exercising their constitutional rights to practice their faith. 3 churches in San Diego County want to open preschools, and they interesting, by coincidence, one of them shares the name with this church, Foothills. But in any event, they wanted to open a preschool. And one of them had a preschool, and it was shut down by the authorities because their 3 to 4-year-olds wouldn't wear their masks. They'd take them off, and their parents said, "We don't want you put masks on our kids," and they couldn't navigate between the state and the parents, and so the Department of Social Services visited them on 7 times without a warrant and closed them down. So they said, let's challenge this in court. And so these three churches, and it is three churches on this one, have decided to go forward to challenge the licensing requirements for preschools. You say, why in the world would someone want to operate a preschool without a license? Well, the church has said, well, the Christian faith has been taking care of children since the Roman Empire. They did it just fine without the help of California. And other reason is this. Take a look at this. So to have a license with the state of California, a church preschool cannot require participation in religious services or activities or attendance. And they have to tell the parents that they don't have to have the kids don't have to show up. Well, that's a non-starter for a church preschool. They have to be able to have religious services, because that's why we have a church preschool. Of course, there was unannounced searches without warning or warrants, so they had to give up their Fourth Amendment rights. The licensure requires that parental rights be waived so that children could be interrogated by social services without parental knowledge or consent, and that did happen. And it was very disturbing for these children. And if you violate these regulations, it's a criminal act. You can go to jail for that. But they would interrogate employees without giving them a Miranda warning. You know what a Miranda warning is? Did you remember 1 Adam 12 from years ago? You have the right to remain silent, anything you say or do. Well, they don't give them that right. And so even though they have criminal liability, complaints could be brought anonymously, so they can't face their accuser. They allow hearsay evidence. There's no right to a jury. And the Department of Social Services functions as the police, the prosecutor, and the judge. So they said, you know what? We don't want a license under those conditions. As a church, we don't want to waive our constitutional rights. It interferes directly with our ministry. And so we are challenging that in court. There's another pivoting to businesses. We're representing a Korean family that owns 2 spas in the state of Washington. In that state, there is something called the Human Rights Commission, and they have all these various rules. Well, this is a Christian family that's had this for a couple of decades, and it is a traditional Korean spa, very much like the old Roman baths. So you had the men go one place, the women on one place. Well, this is a women's spa, and the exfoliation, the massages, the other therapies are done in a state of undress. They're naked. Well, this gentleman just said that he insisted that he be allowed to go in and enjoy those services. And this boss says, we don't allow dudes into our women's spa. It says that we've had a couple of guys sneak in before, and the women felt shame and rage, and they had to refund their money, and they never came back. And so anyway, this gentleman filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, and come to find out he actually never tried to enter, he just called, so he never went in. But nonetheless, he's an activist, and they were going to find these people, and so we are challenging that, saying, Christian businesses, particularly of this type, should be able to protect women in intimate spaces. And so we're challenging that, and that's called Olympus Spas. Sanctity of life. Someone asked that we touch on this. We have done some case law, some work on that. I had a case that went to the Supreme Court on this. But how do you describe sanctity of life? Do you remember the case Dodds versus Mississippi, or the Women's Center, the one that overturned Roe versus Wade? Okay, so that has had some real impact, and the way I try to explain it is the what the landscape of the country is from a quote from Dickens. You remember reading this, Tale of Two Cities? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epic of belief, it was the epic of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the season of hope, and the winter of despair. Good lines, he's a good writer. So anyway, you have a tale of two cities. So in 5 states, they have passed a law, what they call heartbeat laws, so that if a doctor can detect a fetal heartbeat, then abortion is not going to be allowed. If you have a person that has a heartbeat, they are alive, and it's a human being. If you saw someone like that, we found someone like that on the dark side of the moon, we would say there is life on the dark side of the moon, right? So they've passed that. 22 states have passed laws to limit funding to Planned Parenthood. Why should taxpayers have to pay for abortions? And so that seems eminently reasonable. But on the other hand, we have 14 states are increasing funding to Planned Parenthood or directly paying for abortions. You're sitting in one now. In fact, this state is bringing folks over, allowing people from other states to come here and paying for their abortion tourism on your taxpayer dollar. And so another problem we're seeing is when we represent a pro-life clinic. Have you heard of the term lawfare? Who's heard of that term? Okay, lawfare. In essence, you take your enemies and you sue them out of existence, or you criminally prosecute them, your political enemies. It's a form of a political purge. So we're having our state attorney general, and in other states this is happening. They go and get subpoenas, and they subpoena the records of these pro-life clinics, and there's lots and lots of regulations on them because they're a health entity. If they find something wrong, they may sue them, or they may prosecute them, and that's happening in our state. So it's a problem. Let me tell you about what's happening in Los Angeles. You see the young lady dressed in the white dress or light blue dress? Her name is Tasha. She was a paralegal who worked in our office in Sacramento, and she had a lot of interest in the pro-life movement. And so she contacted me and said, since this Roe v. Wade was overturned, and there's the other side is ramping things up. It's rather obvious. She doesn't have to explain that, but. In California, there is a group coming from out of state. The group is called DuPont. They're actually located in Washington, D.C. And DuPont has, what they're known for is their trimester abortions. And so they wanted to open up what was billed as the first trimester abortion clinic in California. And they were going to do it in Beverly Hills. Tasha decided she needed to do something about that. And so she said, she came to me and wanted to know what could be done. She was starting to organize this. She went and talked to a couple of pro-life groups, and they're sort of like, God bless you, go forth and do this and take this on. So she did. And I asked her, so what's the political landscape? What's going on in the legal landscape? She says, well, in Beverly Hills, I believe there were 5 city council persons. They provide the permits. If you want to start a business, you get a permit from the city council, right? So they said, why don't you? I said, who's on this? And she says, well, they're 5 Jews, and they looks like they're approving this. And this group has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their business up and going with the permits and whatnot. And so I said, well, you know what? Let me get you in contact with a gentleman named Omid. Omid that's Omid there. Omid is a Jew. He was a law student, worked for us for a couple of years at our office in Sacramento. I went to McGeorge Law School, and I said, and I knew he had family in Beverly Hills, so I said, let's look at them. And I said, so I looked at the council members, who they were, and looked at their bios and found they went to certain synagogues, and so she contacted Omid, and so Omid found out his cousin attended one of those synagogues, and so they started getting involved with them. They had cell phones. They got a Facebook and a petition. She started contacting churches. He started contacting the synagogues. They contacted a couple of pro-life politicians in the area, and they got a 1,200 petitions signed, 1,200 signatures on a petition, and we're putting some pressure on the city council. And she said one of the things that got her going and kept her going was a verse from Proverbs 31:8. It says, "Open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause for those appointed to die." Open your mouth for the speechless, for those appointed to die. And so Tasha and Omid decided to be the mouth for the speechless. And they pushed forward, and she came in a few weeks ago and said they closed down, they backed off, and they went away. And it was, who knows what the back scenery was, but it was the pressure of ordinary people, synagogues, churches, politicians, to get together and to push forward. And so I think that's just tells us what we can do. These are just, I know these people, they're people like you and me. I mentioned from the outset that the title of my presentation was Making the Most of Your Most Productive Years. And I'd like to conclude by returning to that theme and with a short story from the American Revolution. Now, when we think of the American Revolution, we think of the military leaders and the politicians and the writers. Those are the important players, and that's as it should be, because great events mold great people. But without ordinary people, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did. So let me tell you about Samuel Whitmore. Who's heard of Samuel Whitmore? We have one person. All right. I asked that question in different audiences. I usually don't get too many hands. Samuel Whitmore, you probably not, I don't know if he wrote anything. I don't even know if he was literate. But he was one of the volunteers in the Massachusetts militia at the very beginning of the war. You know, you've heard of the shot heard around the world, the Lexington and Concord. So he was there, and so he decided to join the militia. Now, he was a farmer, and he's a little bit past his prime. He was 78 years old, and he was a bit crippled, but he was going to do his part. So he decided he was going to join and get involved. And as militia tactics were, they would hide behind stone walls, and they would jump up and ambush the enemy if they could. And I don't know if you've been to the East Coast, but when I say a stone wall, they're more like fences. They're about 3 or 4 feet tall and just made of stone. You still see them today. And so as it happened, the British did happen to come by his spot. And so he had brought along his musket, 2 dueling pistols, and a sword. And so he was going to take his shot at them. And so they came by, and up popped old Samuel Whitmore. And he fired at them. He reloaded and fired again and again and again. Got 5 shots off. You know, and I don't know if you've ever tried to load a musket. I think it's not rapid fire. So he was able to get 5 shots off. Actually took down 3 of the enemy. And the British officer in charge had it up to here with that old man. And so he told some of his soldiers to charge and take him out. And so they did. And it's not like the movies. It's a very violent, unpleasant scene. Part of his face was shot off. They stabbed him with bayonets 13 times and left him for dead. And so later on, after everything had passed, his friends came by to retrieve his body. And he was still breathing, and he was trying to reload his musket. So they got a door and used it as a makeshift stretcher. They put it on him, took him to a nearby tavern where there was a physician attending the wounded. And they asked that they would attend to Samuel. He looks at him and said, "I'm sorry, I won't be able to help him. He's too far gone." But they insisted. So upon their insistence, the physician bandaged him up, and he said, regrettably, your friend is going to die. So they carried him to his farm to die, and he did die. 18 years later, at the age of 96. So I conclude by asking, how about you? Have you said in your heart, I'm too old, I'm too weak, I'm too insignificant? Samuel Whitmore had a musket, Moses had a staff, Tasha and Omid had cell phones and a Facebook page. What's in your hand? Are you going to sit on the sidelines while great events are passing you by? I challenge you instead to make the most of your most productive years. God bless you in your work here in Cameron Hill.